Employers requiring the vaccine.
If you choose not to, I think you're choosing not to work for APS.
Is Aurora Public Schools' new mandate legal? How about the rules where you work? Solitary confinement takes a toll on inmates. Good, you say? All right, how about inmates with mental health issues? Is that our goal? Rolling into food deserts with mobile food pantries on wheels. Let's work together to send more of these out into all corners of Colorado, from the city to the plains. And workers digging away for the new interstate are like, dude, is that a camel? It is, or rather, it was, on this Hump Day edition of Next. So you're all ready for the job interview. Any question that they can ask you. And then they ask, are you vaccinated? And it's like, hold on, can an employer even ask that? Well, Republicans at the state legislature want to ensure that that cannot come up, whether in a job interview or while you're making reservations at a restaurant. But there are employers right now with no reservation about making sure that their employees are vaccinated, including a big school district in the metro area. Here's Marshall Zellinger.
A typical school supply list includes pencils, highlighters, and disinfectant wipes. For teachers in Aurora Public Schools, their supply list will include proof of vaccination.
If you choose not to, I think you're choosing not to work for APS.
Superintendent Rico Munn alerted Aurora Public Schools staff to his decision in this letter.
Once there are vaccines or a vaccine approved fully by the FDA, that all of our staff will be required to be vaccinated as a condition of employment unless they have an exemption.
Teachers and staff can opt out for medical or religious reasons, but apparently not because they just don't want to.
Employers have the right to make certain restrictions and circumstances that are outside of federally protected areas.
There currently is litigation on this exact issue, actually, in Los Angeles.
Legal analyst Whitney Traylor believes courts today will have to decide the issue, but previously have sided with what Aurora Public Schools is trying to do.
For the most part, I think an employer can, and in this case, the schools can lawfully require the vaccine for its employees.
This bill was not introduced to discourage, dissuade, or prohibit COVID-19 vaccination.
At the Capitol this afternoon, a committee heard testimony on a Republican-sponsored bill to prevent an employer or a business from using someone's COVID vaccination status against them, basically saying you can't require anyone to get a vaccine for employment or to be a customer.
It seeks to shield individuals from forced vaccination by outlying mandates and using private businesses as the long arms of the law.
I think it does go along those lines of no shirt, no shoes, no service.
Just like businesses have been able to mandate masks for service, refusing someone's business based on vaccination status appears to be a legit business decision.
The people who are choosing that position are not a protected class. The courts have not said this has been a group that's been historically discriminated against, so now we're going to protect them.
That Republican-sponsored bill, which will not survive that committee, is still being debated right now. Public universities have already said they're going to require vaccinations of students next school year, but CU and CSU tell me personal reasons is one of the exemptions allowed for students. So all they have to do is check that box instead of medical or religious. They choose personal, move on their way, can go around campus and stay in the dorms, Kyle.
And Marshall, with these exemptions, especially really loose ones like that, it strikes me that some of these mandates aren't particularly mandates. They're just like hard nudges toward getting people vaccinated.
And you hear that from the Democrats at the legislature. I've talked with a business owner today when I was shooting footage of one of those signs, and they told me, look, we have had this debate. We're still closed for in-person dining, but perhaps if we encourage enough people to get vaccinated, we can open up sooner. It's clearly a debate it's the quiet debate that isn't really being discussed unless you're familiar with the customer, perhaps, and say, hey, are you vaccinated? Can we open up yet?
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Marshall. CDC says that providers can start giving the Pfizer vaccine to 12 to 15-year-olds right away, and UC Health says it'll start offering vaccines to kids with parental consent starting tomorrow morning. Almost 38% of our state's population has completed the vaccination process, more than 2.2 million people, a bit over half of a million people waiting on that second dose. We keep seeing encouraging drops in COVID hospitalizations. We're down to 624 patients right now. That is 7 fewer than the day before and down 42 from this time last week. Tonight's next question comes to us from Amber. She reached out on Twitter recently wondering if the King Soopers in Boulder, where 10 people were killed in a shooting, is going to close. And we got that answer today, Amber. The King Soopers on Table Mesa Drive in Boulder is going to be renovated inside and out with the plan to reopen it in late fall of this year. After Memorial Day, the city is going to go in and remove the remaining flowers and notes that are still on the fence currently surrounding the parking lot. The Museum of Boulder will preserve those items and will work with the families of the shooting victims to decide how those items will be displayed in the future. And there are plans for a permanent memorial at some point. So after somebody's arrested and taken to jail, that is often where their mental health needs intersect with the criminal justice system. Now jails are being more closely scrutinized for when they're putting people in restrictive housing, what's most often referred to as solitary confinement. Anusha Roy walks us through how this issue got to the state capitol.
A man living with bipolar disorder testified that during his first week of solitary confinement, he was in a holding cell where the lights wouldn't turn off. A mental health advocate said the psychological stress created from solitary confinement compares to the distress of physical torture. This is a small sample of what people said while debating House Bill 1211 that's proposing restrictions on when a jail can put someone in restrictive housing.
We define solitary confinement as being left in your cell for more than 22 hours a day.
This proposed bill is focused on people living with serious mental illness, pregnant women, and others living with physical and developmental disabilities.
Have to be allowed out of their cell for more than 2 hours a day.
People on both sides agree safety is the #1 priority.
And we should not be housing people with mental illness in our jails. That is something for the state to really take a long, hard look at.
But for now, the debate is over what is happening inside jails that in many cases have become the de facto place for behavioral health services.
Let's put money into facilities that we can divert people from custody.
Opposition is coming from the very people who would be in charge of implementing the proposed bill.
And we all want to do better.
Arapahoe County Sheriff Tyler Brown said to carry it out safely would cost them roughly $2 million and hiring as many as 40 people. And he isn't sure where the money would come from.
Subdivide or what we call our day rooms or our common spaces inside of our housing units. And then when we subdivide those, we have to make sure that we have appropriate staffing.
So the bill does have some exceptions, right? If someone doesn't want to leave their cell or if it's simply just not safe enough, either for the inmate's sake or for those around them, right? There's a lot of different scenarios that can play out when you're talking about restrictive housing. That would then start triggering more frequent checks on that inmate. There's another area that the sheriffs are also really worried about, and that's if they want to keep someone in solitary confinement for a longer term basis. If the bill passes, it would require a court order, Kyle, and the sheriffs are saying they're not really sure about how quickly that system's going to be set up and how efficiently it's going to work for the speed that they have to make decisions.
You hear cost concerns, Anusha, come up about a lot of bills at the state capitol. And of course, each bill has got an estimated price tag on it. They have to say, here's what we expect the impact to be.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that kept coming up today over and over again, right? It's funding and staffing. And so because of that, the bill is actually just focused on the 9 biggest jails in our state with 400 beds or more, right? And the bill sponsor was saying they acknowledge that smaller jails out in more rural parts of Colorado just wouldn't have the staff or the resources to be able to meet these demands. For those bigger jails and those departments, the state said there is a fund of around $14 million that they could tap into, but also in that same breath acknowledged it's probably not enough to cover all of the costs that may come up, and so said they may have to go find that funding elsewhere to meet the demands of this bill if it passes.
Anusha Roy reporting. We know you'll keep an eye on it. Thank you, Anusha. So hunger is an issue across Colorado in communities where you would expect it and in ones where you might not. And that is why our Word of Thanks microgiving campaigns are working alongside 9Care's Colorado sheriffs for a couple of weeks this month, working on the issue of food insecurity, hunger across our state. Your Word of Thanks microgiving campaign this week is supporting the mobile pantries sent out across Colorado by Food Bank of the Rockies. You've likely heard the term food desert, and you know about these spots that are underserved by grocery stores. They can be urban or suburban or in rural areas. Food Bank of the Rockies rolls out 70 refrigerated trucks a month, basically a food bank on wheels, rolls them to visit those places and to deliver fresh produce and other groceries. First, they locate pockets of need where they think that Coloradans could use additional access to fresh produce and other food items. They pick a day and time, they spread the word in that community, and then they roll up in the big truck to help. Food Bank of the Rockies goes out on these mobile pantry missions more than 800 times a year. And they cover the cost. They don't put it on the small food bank partner in the community that works with them, say like out on the Eastern Plains or in Aurora or in South Denver. They pay for it themselves. So we can help them send out even more of these missions. Text thanks to 303-871-1491 and I will send you that link to donate. As always, I will match the first 50 donations of $5 that come in. Food Bank of the Rockies can stretch $5 into 20 meals for a family. And then their mobile pantries can take our donated meals anywhere the roads go. The Colorado Republican who literally wrote the book on draining the swamp is one of the few in the GOP standing by Liz Cheney today, as she's punished for telling the truth. And guess what day it is? Hump Day. If you just shouted Hump Day, then you probably watched too much TV. But that's okay. And on this Wednesday, we went digging for the real story about the camel unearthed under the interstate. Next. Congressman Ken Buck has had a curious relationship with the big lie about the 2020 presidential election. Today, he spoke up in defense of Representative Liz Cheney from Wyoming as fellow Republicans kicked her out of leadership for telling the truth that President Trump lost the election. Congressman from Colorado, who until recently was also running the state Republican Party, has not always been about upholding the election results. Last November, Buck joined a lawsuit trying to overturn the election results in battleground states to give it to President Trump. But then when supporters of President Trump stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th with the goal of stopping the certification of the election results, Congressman Buck was like, no, I'm not down with this. Don't be doing that. But he also blamed Hollywood types like Robert De Niro and Kathy Griffin for what happened that day. He eventually voted to certify the election results. So anyway, Buck has been back and forth on the big lie, leading to this.
And I now recognize my friend and my neighbor to the north, the gentlelady from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney.
Boris Nemtsov was assassinated by Vladimir Putin.
Buck literally stood by fellow Republican Liz Cheney on the House floor last night as she gave a passionate speech in defense of American democracy, saying that Republican attacks on election integrity play into the hands of communist propaganda from China about America being a failed country. Republicans today voted Cheney out of leadership. Buck backed her in the vote, and he told Republicans afterward that she, quote, was canceled today for speaking her mind. Buck worked for Liz Cheney's father, former Vice President Dick Cheney, back in the 1980s. Republicans are bucking the public health protocols at the state capitol. We noticed today that they have removed the plexiglass dividers between their desks in the House chamber, ditched the masks too. This is the kind of performative stuff that will no doubt go over well with their voters, if not their colleagues. Not every Republican, though, there participated. We noted that House Minority Leader Hugh McKean did not do any interior redecorating. And hey, while we're talking politics, Colorado's Independent Redistricting Commission for Congress, the ones drawing the new lines, they're going to go ahead with starting their map without the new census numbers. That is kind of the whole point of the process, right? New districts based on the new numbers, but those fresh figures are not ready yet. So the commission's going to make some rough maps based on the state's population estimates. And provided that they are not sued into oblivion for taking this approach, they will then use the actual census numbers to make their final maps come fall. Lions and tigers and
mammoths, giant ground sloth, dire wolves.
Oh my, I was prepared for bears, but not all those animals that used to call Colorado home. Apparently, we used to have camels because they dug up a fossilized one from under the I-70 project. I have questions about this camel and its life in what is now Colorado. Next. Maybe you heard the short mention on the TV news last night that workers building the new stretch of I-70 through North Denver dug up a fossilized camel. And then the newscaster just moved on. And I was like, wait, whoa, hold on. Full disclosure, the newscaster was me. So let's return now to the camel fossil thing dug up in Denver. I would like to know about its life, about its friends, when it was roaming around here, doing camel stuff. Photojournalist Mike Grady was ready to do some digging.
Yell a little bit. It is loud out here, but I want to make sure everybody can hear me. We were digging down by the Union Pacific Crossing, and we came across a fossilized camel, which, and yes, camel is what I said.
We are looking at all the fossils that we collected from the Central 70 project. My name is Paul Murphy. I'm a paleontologist. We've been on site continuously for some of the excavations. After the fossils were discovered, we went out and were there watching these sediments for quite a while because we didn't expect Pleistocene bones to pop up. A upper molar tooth of a Pleistocene horse. We also have a couple camel teeth, a pretty large camel. Most people think of camels as living in the desert, but during North America, during the late Pleistocene, they actually lived in all sorts of environments, including our Great Plains. Chances are these were humpless, something like a large llama shape and not like a big humpy camel. They come from sediments that are Pleistocene age, so Ice Age. So these things are probably more along the lines of 10 to 12,000 years old. These things were found after they had been disturbed, so they were in spoils piles. We didn't see them until they had been dug up, and most people, when they hear about something like a fossil, anything, they think of, oh my God, they found a big skeleton. It's like, that's really rare. It's more likely we find something isolated like this.
I did not know that humpless camels were a thing at any time. I thought that was like the card that you need to show to get into the camel family. I was wrong. You learn something new on Next every day. Paleo Solutions still has that fossil of the humpless camel. Once the Central 70 project is complete, they will turn over the bits of camel, along with the bits of the other old animals, to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. So you have proven the power of $5 every time you pile up your Word of Thanks donations together into something impactful. And this week, $5 means 20 meals for a family through a program that drives that food out to every corner of our state. That effort and your feedback next. You know, I'm not sure how often we think about transportation as being part of Colorado's hunger problem, but it does make sense. I mean, whether it's a lack of reliable public transit in the suburbs to get to the grocery store or the food bank, or having to drive like an hour plus out on the plains, Coloradans who are far from grocery stores and food banks have yet another hurdle to feeding their families. And that is why your Word of Thanks microgiving campaign this week is supporting the Food Bank of the Rockies mobile pantries. So they'll find a neighborhood or a town in need, they'll load up a big refrigerated truck with fresh stuff in addition to the non-perishables, and they'll drive right into the heart of that community, and boom, it's Food Bank on wheels, whether that's in the metro area or the mountains or out on the eastern plains. If you text THANKS to 303-871-1491, I'll send you that link to join me in donating. Next time you pass the truck on the highway, you'll know where it's going and how you helped. Debbie writes in upon hearing that we are shutting down this home studio at the end of May, and she says, please autograph a piece of the wood and send it to me. I'll put it next to my fireplace. Debbie, stay tuned. We're scheming on this. We've got ideas, Debbie, big ideas.